Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We got to give a shout out to Lit RPG Reads and Paul Bello,
Oh,
a fine fellow indeed.
absolutely.
And they're the inspiration for this deep dive. We're talking about the article, How to Make Your D&D Campaign More Immersive. I mean, who doesn't want to feel like they've actually stepped into, a dungeon or a bustling tavern?
For sure.
It really reminds me of this one session where our DM was describing a fight scene. And it wasn't just like you hit the goblin.
Right.
It was like your axe cleaves through the air. The goblin's shield is splintering under the force of the blow. You can feel the shock travel up your arms. And suddenly, I was in that fight.
Wow.
Feeling every swing.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of immersion we're talking about today. And the Lit RPG Reads article has some really great tips. What really jumped out at me was this idea of going beyond sight, engaging all the senses, appealing to human psychology.
Well, what's fascinating here is how our brains are actually wired for multisensory input. Think about it. When you walk into a bakery, it's not just the sight of the bread that makes you hungry.
Oh, yeah.
It's the smell of yeast and sugar, the warmth of the oven. Maybe even the sound of the crust crackling D&D can tap into that same power. The article gives examples like the clinking metal of armor, the musty tomes in a library, the acrid smoke from a battlefield.
Ooh, yeah.
These details might seem small, but they add layers of realism to the experience,
I like that.
making it more visceral and memorable for the players.
Definitely. And speaking of realism, let's talk about world building.
Okay.
The article emphasizes a balance between detail and player agency. It's not just about the DM creating a static world. It's about giving the players the opportunity to shape and influence that world.
Right.
And I love that they have this world-building framework table with all these cool region and culture pairings. It's like a springboard for ideas.
Oh, yeah.
You could have Frostalo with its barbarian culture and towering ice spires, or the Azure Archipelago, where sea folk practice oceanic bonding in their coral cathedrals.
Interesting.
The article gives you the building blocks,
Yeah.
but then it's up to the players to really make it their own.
Right.
Their choices, their backstories, their actions, they can all become part of the world's history and shape its future.
Well, what's key here is that feeling of co-creation.
Yeah.
It makes the world feel more dynamic and responsive to the player's actions.
For sure.
Which just adds to the immersion. And it makes the players more invested in the outcome because they've helped to shape it.
I agree. Now, no immersive world is complete without memorable characters, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And the article calls this section Breathing Life into NPCs.
Okay.
And I think this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. The article highlights the importance of giving NPCs unique voices and motivations, that go beyond just serving the plot. It even provides an NPC framework table with some really evocative examples.
Oh, cool. Imagine encountering a reclusive hermit who speaks in cryptic riddles.
Okay.
Or maybe an overzealous priest with a penchant for fire and brimstone sermons.
Huh.
Suddenly, it's not just a quest giver.
Right.
It's a character you remember.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the world feel alive.
Yeah.
Populated by individuals, not just plot devices.
One thing that always pulls me out of the game is when an NPC just feels like a walking quest dispenser. They're there to give you information or point you in the right direction, and that's it.
Yeah,
No personality, no quirks, no depth.
I see that.
But when an NPC has their own goals and desires,
Right.
even if they're just trying to run a shop or protect their family,
Sure.
it makes them feel more real. And it makes your interactions with them more meaningful.
That's a great point.
Right.
And it ties back to what we were saying earlier about player agency.
Got it.
When NPCs have their own agendas, it creates opportunities for the players to role play, to negotiate, to form alliances or rivalries.
Maybe you can convince that overzealous priest to help you on your quest. Or maybe you end up clashing with him because your goals conflict.
Oh, interesting.
Those are the kinds of choices that make the game feel dynamic and unpredictable.
Exactly. And those unexpected moments, those twists and turns in the story are what make D&D so exciting.
Yeah.
The Lit RPG Reads article talks about the importance of plot twists and surprises and how they can breathe new life into a campaign.
Okay.
It's like you think you know where the story's going and then, bam, something happens that throws you completely off course.
Right.
And suddenly you're on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen next.
Well, what's fascinating here is the tension between having a plan as a DM and being willing to deviate from it.
Yeah.
A good DM knows their world and their story,
Right.
but they're also open to improvisation, to letting the player's choices shape the narrative.
Definitely.
Remember that story framework table in the article?
Oh, yeah.
It has scenarios like, what if the players choose to betray an ally? Think about the consequences of that decision.
Right.
How it could ripple through the campaign and create a totally different experience than the one you originally planned.
Totally. It reminds me of this one time our party was tasked with escorting a diplomat to a peace summit.
Okay.
We were all set to play the role of the noble heroes.
Right.
But then one of our players decided to go rogue.
What?
He convinced the rest of the party that the diplomat was actually a traitor.
No way.
And we ended up staging a coup.
Wow.
It completely derailed the DM's plans.
I bet.
But it was one of the most memorable sessions we ever had.
That's a perfect example of how embracing the unexpected can lead to amazing moments. It keeps the players engaged, it forces them to think on their feet.
For sure.
And it creates stories that you'll never forget.
Absolutely. And speaking of unforgettable moments, let's not forget about combat.
Right.
It's a core element of D&D,
Yeah.
but it can sometimes feel a bit mechanical. Just a series of dice rolls and calculations.
See.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the things that the article talks about, making combat feel more visceral and exciting.
Okay.
Going beyond just you hit the goblin
Yeah.
and really painting a picture with words.
Right.
They talk about using cinematic descriptions and treating terrain as a character. Instead of just saying you're fighting in a forest,
Yeah.
you can say something like, the air is thick with the scent of pine needles as you dodge between towering trees, the roots snaking across the forest floor like grasping claws.
Exactly. And those descriptions can evoke all sorts of sensory details. The feel of the damp earth beneath your feet.
Oh, yeah.
The sound of leaves crunching as you move. The taste of sweat and blood in your mouth.
Ooh.
And when you start thinking of the terrain as an active participant in the fight, it opens up all sorts of tactical possibilities. Maybe you can use those tree roots to your advantage, tripping up your enemies or hiding behind them for cover.
I love that. It's like the environment becomes another character in the story,
Yeah.
adding another layer of depth and complexity to the fight.
Exactly. And when you combine that with those visceral descriptions,
Right.
combat suddenly feels more intense, more real.
It's not just about rolling dice anymore. It's about experiencing the fight.
Right.
Feeling the adrenaline pumping through your veins.
Yeah.
The clash of steel, the desperation of a life or death struggle.
And speaking of experiencing things, the article also talks about the power of tangible objects to ground the experience. Even in a digital age, physical props can create a stronger connection to the game world.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine receiving a letter sealed with wax from an NPC,
Oh, cool.
or piecing together a torn map that leads to a long-lost treasure.
Ooh, yeah. I still have a map from one of my first campaigns. It's all tattered and worn, but brings back so many memories.
It's amazing how even a simple object can hold so much emotional weight, and it ties back to what we were saying earlier about engaging all the senses. It's about going beyond just sight and sound.
Yeah.
And creating a more tactile and immersive experience.
You know, one thing I've always wanted to try is creating custom props for my players. Like, imagine giving them a magic item.
Oh, yeah.
That's not just a stat block on a character sheet,
Right.
but an actual physical object that they can hold and examine.
I like that.
Maybe it's a beautifully crafted amulet with intricate carvings,
Okay.
or a mysterious scroll with strange symbols.
That's a fantastic idea. The article talks about creating maps worth keeping and handouts that tell stories.
Right.
Imagine handing your players a map that's not just a piece of paper, but a work of art with detailed illustrations and hidden clues, or giving them a handout that's written in a unique script with faded ink and cryptic messages.
Those are the kinds of things that players will treasure long after the campaign is over.
Absolutely.
They become tangible reminders of the adventures they've shared and the stories they've created together.
And they add a whole new layer of depth and immersion to the game, making it feel more real and more meaningful.
So we've talked about engaging the senses, creating a world that feels real, and embracing the dynamic, collaborative nature of D&D. But what about the emotional core of the story? How do we create those moments that truly resonate with players on an emotional level?
It seems like we keep coming back to this idea of player agency.
Yeah.
And really getting into character.
Yeah.
The article even suggests that something like a virtual tabletop can actually make role-playing better.
Really? Now, that's interesting because you'd think the digital aspect would distance you from the game.
That's what I thought too. But consider this. When you're on a platform like Roll20, your character sheet is right there.
Yeah.
Every ability and detail at your fingertips, it really encourages you to think, what would my character do in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
You're less likely to fall back on the same old tactics.
That's a good point. It's almost like the virtual tabletop becomes a tool for self-discovery.
Exactly.
You're constantly reminded of your character's strengths, weaknesses, and motivations,
Right.
which can lead to more thoughtful and immersive role-playing.
And some of those platforms even have features for voice acting or sound effects.
Oh, yeah. That could really amp up the immersion.
Absolutely. Imagine being able to play a dramatic sound cue when your character casts a powerful spell.
Ooh.
Or using a voice modulator to give your character a unique accent.
That would be cool.
Suddenly, you're not just describing your actions, you're embodying them.
That's awesome.
Yep.
And it's not just about technology either.
Right.
The article also highlights the importance of something we often forget about in a tabletop setting.
What's that?
Body language.
Body language. How do we bring that into D&D?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how would a timid rogue move compared to a bold warrior?
Good question.
Okay.
How would their posture, gestures, facial expressions differ?
I see what you mean.
Even something as simple as sitting up straight or leaning forward can convey a lot about your character's state of mind.
Oh, yeah.
Are they alert and ready for action, or are they slumped over in despair?
Wow. I never really thought about it like that. But you're right.
Uh-huh.
Our physicality can communicate so much about our characters, even without saying a word.
So next time you're playing your brooding, edgy rogue,
Okay.
you're going to have to work on your 1,000-yard stare.
Maybe practice lurking in the shadows a bit.
Exactly. And if you're playing a boisterous bard, maybe practice a few sweeping gestures and dramatic flourishes.
I love that. It's like we're adding another layer of performance to the game.
Right.
Making it more engaging and immersive for everyone.
Speaking of bringing things to life, we talked briefly about costuming earlier.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about how that can play a role in immersion.
Well, it's really simple. When you dress the part, it's easier to feel the part. Even something as basic as wearing a cloak or a hat can help you step into your character's shoes.
Okay.
It's a visual cue that signals to yourself and others that you're inhabiting a different persona.
You know, it reminds me of this one time our DM encouraged us to dress up for a special Halloween session.
Oh, fine.
We went all out costumes, props, the works. And it was incredible. It really felt like we were stepping into another world.
It's exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. Even a few small touches can make a big difference.
Right.
A simple tunic for a medieval-themed campaign, a fedora for a noir-inspired game.
It's about finding those little ways to enhance the atmosphere and signal that you're in a different world.
Okay, so we've got sight, sound, touch. Are there ways to bring smell and taste into D&D? Those seem tricky.
They are, but they're not impossible.
Okay.
It starts with the DM's descriptions. Instead of just saying you enter a tavern,
Yeah.
try adding details like the air is thick with the scent of ale and roasting meat. You can feel the warmth of the fire on your face, and the floor is sticky beneath your boots.
Ooh, I like that.
You can even use essential oils to create different scents.
Great.
Or have players sample foods and drinks that are relevant to the campaign setting.
Now, that's a cool idea. Imagine serving mead and roasted nuts for a medieval-themed game.
Yeah.
Or spicy noodles for a campaign set in an Asian-inspired world.
It's like you're engaging all 5 senses to create a more holistic and immersive experience.
I love it. And let's not forget about the power of music to set the mood.
Oh, yeah.
Think about how movie soundtracks can evoke such powerful emotions.
Definitely.
The right music can make a scene feel epic, suspenseful, or even downright terrifying.
There are tons of great resources out there for finding D&D-themed music.
Oh, for sure.
From orchestral scores to ambient soundscapes.
Some DMs even create custom playlists for their campaigns, tailoring the music to specific scenes and locations.
It's like you're building a sensory world around the players, drawing them in and making them feel like they're truly part of the story.
Absolutely. And speaking of stories,
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that all these tips and techniques,
Right.
the world building, the NPCs, the role-playing, the sensory details, they're all in service of creating a compelling and immersive narrative.
The article emphasizes the importance of having a story that you're passionate about, telling a world that you want to share with your players. Because that passion is contagious. It's what inspires players to get invested in their characters, to make bold choices, and to create those unforgettable moments that make D&D so special.
So to Paul Bello, fine fellow indeed.
Absolutely.
And to all of you listening out there, a huge thank you for joining us on this deep dive into immersive D&D.
It's been a pleasure.
We've covered a lot of ground, but the journey doesn't end here.
For sure.
What are some of your favorite ways to make D&D more immersive? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below.
Yeah, let us know.
We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, keep those dice rolling and those imaginations soaring.